What's up everyone, I'm Twisted. I finished reading the Ambessa novel a few days ago, and so there's a bunch of videos I wanna make about it. In today's video we'll be taking a look at some references and details and fun facts present in the book. None of what I'll mention in this video spoils the main story of the novel, however these details aren't just placed randomly in the book. They're relevant to the story, there's context behind their inclusion, so do keep that in mind if you haven't read the novel yourself. I'll start with the least spoilery details and then progress to some that are a bit more spoilery, but also more interesting. Don't worry, I'll give you some warnings along the way. The novel comes with a map of Southeast Noxus, featuring all the locations where the story takes place, as well as the stewards of each location. Some are Medarda themselves, others are just allies or tied to the family somehow. Now, back in the day, Runeterra's map used to look like this. Then, at some point we got this map of the Freljord, and then much later, after the major retcon and the introduction of the Universe website, we got this map. This was part of the Medarda's Heirloom, a map featuring notes from the Medarda clan, as well as some letters. It would take another 2 years after this for us to see the map of Runeterra as we know now, but this was a small piece of it, the first one we ever saw. Some of its details got outdated with the introduction of the modern map, as you can notice some of the borders don't really match, but still this was the first part of the modern Runeterra that we ever got. Not only does this map feature the same locations from the map in the novel, but this map was also tied to the Medarda, which I hadn't mentioned, but yes, they existed before Arcane. Even the stewards of the cities have the same exact names. For example, Tafik is indeed the steward of Tereshni in the novel. So despite this map likely not being fully canon anymore, it's cool that they managed to keep some of its ideas intact. Also, I want to add that the map in the novel has the same exact borders as the modern map, but its proportions are a bit off, which I think it's okay because this is supposed to be a in-universe map. I don't think we should overthink this. The novel spends a lot of time describing these locations, from their architecture to the commerce that can be found there, sometimes even some history about the places. Belgium is probably the most interesting one, so let's first talk about the others. As we know from her biography, Rockrund is the homeland of Ambessa, but now we also know that the steward of the city is her brother, Kythera. Here they control saltpeter mines. The mineral is mined and transported to the Medarda citadel in the city and then used in artillery, ship cannons and food preservation. There aren't many of these mines in Noxus, which is quite good for the Medarda. In Vindor, there's a Noxtora carved more artistically than most. Patterns of triangles, almost mosaics, and the pattern repeats throughout the city on buildings, roads and major intersections. Trenit sits on top of a cliff, and underneath is a system of caves they use as a prison called the Hold. These are just some examples, there are many more details in the novel. Now, Belgium, which is the correct pronunciation according to the audio version of the novel. Some of the old buildings there have spires with gold tips, said to have come from the sun discs of old. Here exists a marketplace called the Shimmering Market, home to many types of artists. The Barrel is the name of one of the less wealthy neighborhoods, while Bells is what the locals call the more wealthy neighborhoods. At the time of the novel, most of the Medarda's power was concentrated in Belgium. Their military presence in the city ensured favorable rates on trades through the Sun Gates of Piltover. You heard that right, the Sun Gates are still canon. Their backstory probably isn't, but hey, they weren't mentioned at all in Arcane, so I'm glad they still exist. In this city there's a group of rebels, the Sons of Belgium. Their name was also on the old map. They sometimes used graffiti in the shape of a Shuriman sun with spears as rays, though this was also used by non-members of the group. Valif, whose name is also on the map, was the Aegios of Belgium before Noxus came. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He was basically the leader of the city, until Menelik came, Ambessa's grandfather. All the other influential families and important people of the city betrayed Valif, preferring the stability that Noxians brought. Following this, Valif built a band of rebels, the Sons of Belgium. A nice backstory for both a group and a character that before the novel were not relevant at all. The novel says the Medarda were the ones that led to a Noxtora being built in the north side of Belgium. Noxtora are built on roads that the Noxians conquered, a reminder of who those roads belong to. And as I've said, the Medarda were the ones that took over Belgium, so this makes sense. Alright, now let's speedrun other locations that are mentioned. In terms of regions, besides Noxus and Shurima, we have Freljord, Demacia, Targon, Piltover, Ionia and Bilgewater. In terms of cities or other places besides the ones marked on the novel's map, we have the Iron Spikes, the Great Sai, Nashramei, Qualthala, Bloodcliffs, the Great Barrier, Mudtown, and the Serpent Isles. Since we're talking about locations, let's start with the most important one in Noxus. The novel takes some time to describe the Noxian capital, and I'm pretty sure that what I'll say here is mostly new information, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's start with the lower city, described as being gathered around the outer walls like barnacles on a ship's hull. As you get closer to the outer walls, you can find tents, then shacks, then shady travelers' lodgings, then more respectable ones, and then finally permanent dwellings. The outer walls are split by Noxtora, the southmost being called the Conqueror's Gate, perhaps named after a certain conqueror. After crossing it, we are truly inside the capital and we can find both old and new buildings. Then, after the inner wall, we can find the Still City. This is where the most important Noxians live. The Medarda have a house here where Ambessa's elder brother lives. Early on the city's life, this area was where the proudest warriors live. Finally, at the heart of the Noxian capital is the fortress known as the Immortal Bastion, of course built by Mordekaiser. Inside it is a haunted inner sanctum, eerie, almost sacred, that no one dared to tread. Basically, the closer you live to the center, the more important and wealthy you likely are, though more and more of these people are also living in the lower city now. The capital itself has seen better days because Darkwill wasn't exactly using the tax money for maintenance and upkeep, instead keeping it for himself and wasting it on luxurious things. And since we are talking about the Immortal Bastion and wealthy people in Noxus, let me segue to an old story of a non-Noxian family. Well, Ambessa calls it a story, her brother calls it history, so this might have actually happened. But before that, if you've watched the video this far, consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Just after the founding of Noxus, the Lord of House Kythera died and left no children. You might recognize the name as this is the name of Elisa's family, though this story likely predates her. Anyway, the nieces and nephews of the Lord fought until they were all dead except the youngest one. However, his wife was having an affair with a brother he killed, so she poisoned him in his sleep. Whether this story actually happened or not, it's now used, at least by Ambessa's brother, as a cautionary tale, a warning to how bad family wars can be when the leader of the family leaves no heir. But there's actually one more interesting thing about this story. You see, Elise once had a husband. One day, he poisoned her and demanded her to give him the power over her family. Elise then killed him and took the antidote he had on his person. So it's funny how we have two different stories about members of the Kythera family poisoning their spouses. A lot of non-animal species are mentioned, such as drakehounds. We learned that they originally came from the mountains of northern Noxus, though they could be found in many locations now. Most of the Medarda drakehounds come from the same kennels before they find their owners. Each is trained with the same basic commands, which were given with different whistles: give chase, calm, kill, and stop. Dormun, Skalashi, and Ralsigi are mentioned. These are all Shuriman species that we knew of. Moatish are also mentioned. Before, these were only ever present in that old map, if I'm not mistaken. We learn a bit more about horses in Noxus, how the most prized ones come from the stables of the Steward of Vindor. This was, you guessed it, also in the old map. From her stables also comes a brand new mount, exclusive to the novel, the Swift Horns. These are mounts that have massive pronged bony horns jutted out of their heads and down the length of their necks, used for goring predators. Now, getting slightly more into spoilery territory, in the novel we actually get the backstory of the Medarda family. Their story starts with Eskander Medarda, in the early days of the Noxian Empire, when they were still warring Noxian houses, barely unified. Eskander was a Shuriman nomad who guided Noxian explorers and merchants through the Shuriman desert. At some point, he fought bands of Ralsigi to save the cowardly Noxians. He accompanied the last surviving Noxian as a friend, learned the Noxian ways, and then killed him to take his land and titles for himself. That's how he went from a Shuriman guide to the leader of one of the most powerful Noxian clans. Despite their Shuriman roots, the Medarda are as Noxian as they come. Since we're talking about the Medarda, let me also add that we get a mention of Jago Medarda. Jago was seen before in the Universe website, in the Realms of Runeterra book, even in Legends of Runeterra, but also in that old map. Well, he wasn't seen there, but the letters present belong to him. Once again, getting closer to what could be considered spoilers, again, you've been warned. The prologue of the novel gives more context behind the Blood, Sweat and Tears music video. Ambessa and her soldiers were protecting their home in Rockroom from the Raxii. an old Noxii tribe that didn't join Noxus. If you remember, the Noxii tribes were the ones that united against Mordekaiser, and they are the ancestors of the modern Noxians. This tribe, however, didn't join them, it seems. The fact that they were Noxii might explain why their heroes looked so Noxian in the music video. We also learn why she was fighting despite being pregnant with Mel. It was because she wanted her daughter to be born in Rockrun. As for the vision she had, we know that she almost died, if not actually died, but she refused to stay in Volraknun, refusing to stay dead because that would mean the death of her child as well. This was my interpretation of what we saw in the music video back when it came out, so it's cool to know that I was right. Oh, and we also know that Ambessa was in her 30s when this happened. Oh, and while editing, I actually remembered another detail from the vision that is present in the novel. These guys right here are actually ancient warriors that died and went to Volraknun. So I was also right by assuming that this was a Spirit Blossom situation, where the skins of the champions represent other characters and not the champions themselves. In the novel, we also learn more about the flashback we saw in Arcane. This scene doesn't take place in Ionia as I had previously thought. Instead, this took place in Kumangra. However, this palace belonged to the Binaan family, which left Ionia generations ago. Now, a couple details about Ambessa. First, the less spoilery ones. Ambessa has used the spoils of her battles to commission at least 2 Reckoner arenas. The first one she ever commissioned was in Rockrun, 2 decades before the novel, and later she funded one in Belgium. It's possible that one of these is the one we saw in the Mel comic. I'm still not sure what they meant by Shuriman Quarter, but well, neither Rockrun nor Belgium are in the Immortal Bastion, so this might just be another arena. Also, this love for the arenas that Ambessa has was mentioned in her bio. It was in the Rockrun arena that she found Rictus, a skilled warrior who was deep in debt. She bought his debts, which he paid for by fighting for her. After paying everything, he decided to stay with her. Ambessa has many warbands, such as the Fists and the Scars Rangers, the latter being scouts, and she also has the Wolves Reapers, which were elite warriors she picked from the best of other warbands or hand-selected from the Reckoner's pits. She has many ships, some given to her by her grandfather. We know the name of some, such as the Silver Muatis, the Cacklebird, and the Golden Dancer, the last one likely being named after one of the characters in the novel. We also learn a lot about Ambessa's childhood. This part is quite spoilery, despite not including anything from the main story itself, so again, you've been warned. Her father was the first to train her. He put a sword in her hand before she could stand, and she was 5 when she lifted a steel sword for the first time. In Arcane and in her biography, we learn that her father took her to the aftermath of the Battle of Ildonard when she was 10, to pick up swords, but really it was for her to learn death. Here was when she cut herself on a blade for the first time. In the novel, she reminisces about her first kill, wondering if it was a wounded woman she mercy killed after picking up her sword, about 30 years ago. Considering that she is in her 40s in the novel and that she picked up the woman's sword, this probably happened in the aftermath of the Battle of Ildonard. Her father died shortly after this battle. Then her mother immediately gave her to the care of her grandfather. She was taken so young, likely because her grandfather had deemed her elder brother to not be good enough, and so he cast him out. Now, where have I seen that before? When she was 15, she was already one of the most promising young warriors in her clan. She wasn't 19 yet when she participated in the Medarda Trial of Strength, a test that anyone from the Medarda provinces could participate in. The reward was land, a title, the favor of Menelik. It could lead to having a warband, a fleet, or even being adopted to the family if you weren't a Medarda. All they had to do was slay a mighty beast. During this, Ambessa managed to capture a Drakehound matriarch, gaining the favor of her grandfather. This Drakehound had puppies, 2 of them Ambessa would favor. These were called Quench and Temper. During the events of the novel, they were no longer alive. The Medarda really liked their Drakehounds, and this is another example of it, and this is actually referenced in League as well because Drakehound's Step is the name of Ambessa's passive. And now finally, let me just mention a couple non-characters that appear or are mentioned. If you don't want me to ruin your surprise, please skip ahead. Obviously, the many stewards from the map are present, as well as Ambessa, Rictus, Mel, and Kino, which we first saw in Arcane, but in the novel there's also Elora, the lady from the flashback, and I guess technically Azizi, Ambessa's husband. He does appear in the show in this drawing. I've mentioned Boran Darkwill and Jago Medarda, but there's also Marcus Dukuto, who only makes a brief appearance. In terms of champions, I've mentioned Mordekaiser, the Kindred were in Ambessa's vision. You likely already know about Rel, and it's probably not a surprise to know that LeBlanc also appears, but there's also Swain, who like Marcus makes a very brief appearance. And there's also Rise, who is mentioned by some characters. And that's it, these were all the cool details I wanted to share about the novel. I have more ideas for videos related to it, I'll leave some on the screen right now. Let me know which one of these would you like to see first. And also feel free to leave other ideas down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, it's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next one.